You can't cancel me! I'm about to win RuPaul's Drag Race! That's something that might have been thought by Joey Guglielmelli, a now 32-year-old New York-born drag queen who appeared on the 12th season of the hit show RuPaul's Drag Race. Guglielmelli, also known as Sherry Pie, had outlasted 9 other contestants on the show and was down to the final 4, with the potential to win the entire season. Throughout his run, Sherry Pie wasn't up for elimination once and had won several challenges. There was one challenge that Sherry Pie wouldn't be able to overcome, however, and that was actually staying on the show after numerous revelations of sexual misconduct. Potentially upwards of 40 to be precise. A BuzzFeed article written about the incident stated, "At least 5 aspiring young actors told BuzzFeed News a contestant on this season of RuPaul's Drag Race catfished them over several years via email, posing as a casting director who led them to submit embarrassing audition tapes of themselves saying and doing degrading and sexual acts." Joey Guglielmelli, better known by his drag persona Sherry Pie, is alleged to have deceived his former classmates at SUNY Cortland in New York, as well as actors he worked with in a Nebraska theatre company. In one instance, a 25-year-old named Ben Shimkus was tricked by Guglielmelli, who posed as a woman named Allison Mossy, who told Shimkus that he'd be paid $900 a week and given a place to stay in New York for playing a character in an upcoming production called Bulk. Within this play, Shimkus was supposed to wear a series of bodysuits as his character grew more and more muscle-bound. Some of the questions that Guglielmelli asked Shimkus under the guise of Allison Mossy seemed to be sexually gratifying for him. To try and gauge his character, he asked Shimkus how he would feel being that size, or asked him why he thought that his character stopped wearing deodorant in the show. And yes, you heard that right, Guglielmelli actually wrote an entire script for this. It was an incredibly complex ruse. Nonetheless, this was incredibly embarrassing for Shimkus, and was all for Guglielmelli's gratification. In yet another instance, Guglielmelli tried the same thing with a 23-year-old named Josh Lillyman. In this case, things went even further, as Guglielmelli was able to convince Lillyman that he worked for the fictitious Mossy. He was able to convince Lillyman by communicating through Allison Mossy that the two should work together to help Lillyman prepare for this play. In this instance, he was able to coerce Lillyman to pleasure himself on camera as a way to fit the character's need for macho masculinity. In the fallout of this news breaking, a lot of people were saying that this was unambiguously a sex crime and that Joey was actually quite lucky for not getting arrested. It was of course grounds for him to get kicked off the show, but to be honest, that should have been the least of his concerns. In response, Joey wrote an apology on Facebook stating, "This is Joey. I want to start by saying how sorry I am that I caused such trauma and pain, and how horribly embarrassed and disgusted I am with myself. I know that the pain and hurt I caused will never go away, and I know that what I did was wrong and truly cruel. Until being on RuPaul's Drag Race, I never really understood how much my mental health and taking care of things meant. I learned on that show how important loving yourself is, and I don't think I have ever loved myself. I've been seeking help and receiving treatment since coming back to NYC. I truly apologise to everyone I hurt with my actions. I also want to say how sorry I am to my sisters of season 12, and honestly the whole network and production company. All I can do is change the behaviour, and that starts with me and doing that work." This statement was incredibly vague and at no point specifically addressed what he actually did, and so it was for the most part hated and reviled. That said, there were a few replies on this Facebook post that seemed to be sympathetic towards Joey. On Instagram to this very day, there are still a few people who come forward throwing Joey their support, or even criticising the victims for coming out with their experiences. The mental gymnastics that some of these people did, or even are still doing, is crazy. For the most part though, Sherry Pie is of course now despised. After this, there was a bit of a radio silence. Joey would update the Sherry Pie profile picture in February 2021. This was around the same time he appeared on the Tamron Hall show for an interview. During the interview, Guglielmelli said this.
"I don't know if after I do this interview, if more will come forward. I'm here to just apologize."
And this would suggest that yes, there were in fact more victims than had initially come forward. Guglielmelli's last Instagram post was in early 2020, and he hasn't updated his Facebook in about 3 years. Being known to many as a predator, Joey will surely never make a comeback. But that's just the first of several different catfish stories I have for you today. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page here, a catfish is defined as someone who lies about their identity through the internet. This is perhaps most frequently done as a way to scam a victim and take their money, but oftentimes it could also be as a form of revenge, or sometimes even just pure chaos. And our next story is chaotic to say the least. This is a simple story that dates back to June 2021 and begins with a TikToker named Tanith Gregory, who a couple of years ago made a few videos reviewing various profiles on Tinder. From dudes who exhibit huge red flags in their bios to guys who want to be literal slaves. However, one video she made would garner a lot more attention than the rest. That being her video exposing a Tinder user known as Andrew for his horrendous attempt at catfishing. This is his profile. Fun, loyal, keen to meet an easygoing person. Now, one of the first big problems that I saw with his profile, and this is something that's been parroted by the comments, is that he looks like this despite claiming to be 48. I don't know about you, but I placed this guy in maybe his mid-30s, and the image doesn't exactly look to be old, it seems quite recent. But if that wasn't enough, then I have to admit I've been keeping you from the truth. The real problem with his profile is this. He forgot to crop out his Google search at the very top of the screen. Allow me to play Tanith's video of what she had to say.
If you're going to go to the effort of catfishing people on Tinder, Andrew, at least go to the effort of cropping the Google search out.
So you can very clearly see that he's just looked up a model on Google. Clearly, whoever this actually is just isn't the brightest tool in the shed. As I said, this is a very simple and basic story. There wasn't any crazy schemes going on here, it's just a dude being an idiot with his profile. He's probably the most obvious catfish I've ever seen. As you might expect, a lot of the comments were roasting him, but this is definitely not as serious as some of the other catfishes we've covered so far. This guy was just a plain idiot. And I'd be an idiot if I didn't take a moment out of this video to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this and you haven't already yet. My ex-wife and current tormentor Samantha needs her alimony money now! The last check bounced, this one cannot. She has my hamster, guys. Please! Sorry about that. That said, let's move on to our next story. Let me tell you about a catfisher who is behind bars as we speak. It was December 2021 in Michigan when there were reports within a school that several students were becoming victim to online harassment on a mass scale. For almost 2 years in total, 349 pages of hateful and threatening messages were sent to a young girl, some of her friends, and her boyfriend, with no culprits in sight. The girl's name was never released. I'd anticipate on account of her being underage, so we'll call her Miss Licari. She asked those around her for advice and help, and her mother told her of some classmates that she thought were the culprits. Miss Licari's mother worked at her school as a basketball coach, so she would have known the students as well as their behaviour quite well. This hate and harassment got so severe that local law enforcement would get involved, and according to The Independent, as eventually did the FBI. Within time, law enforcement would track down the IP address of this secret hater, and what they would discover next would be a great shock to the local community, as it was revealed that Miss Licari's own mother, Kendra Licari, was behind the account. Apparently, right before hateful messages were being sent from a fake account, she would change her IP address, but it was eventually traced back to Licari's house. She was using a catfish profile to deceive her own daughter into thinking that the harasser was one of her teenage classmates. As already mentioned, she would hurl 349 pages worth of hateful messages over 2 years to her and her friends, and then when her own daughter would go to her mother for help, she would lie straight to her face and pin it on someone else. The power that she would have had over her daughter by being a basketball coach at her school, as well as the extreme lengths that she went to try and mask her identity, make this an absolutely bewildering case. Licari even went as far as going to the police alongside her daughter's boyfriend's mother, knowing full well that she was the one behind all of this. And one of the craziest things about it is that to this day, I still couldn't tell you the motive. Because yes, Licari was taken to court because of this, and throughout various reports I found, a motive was never given. The best guess given by people involved in this case was mental illness, and though this is by no means an excuse, it was perhaps the most logical reason that anyone could muster up. During the trial, her daughter pushed for leniency, whereas her daughter's boyfriend's family pushed for a more severe punishment. Kendra Licari would face 5 charges, including stalking a minor and obstruction of justice. And in the end, almost a year ago to this very day, Kendra Licari was sentenced to up to 5 years in prison, with her having to serve at least 1.5. So far in this video, the people who have been exposed as catfishes have been relatively insignificant little gremlins who hide behind this facade of helplessness. The subject of our next tale, however, was actually a person with quite a distinguished career. He was a comparatively young American politician who served as a member of the Illinois House of Representatives. His case was finally resolved about half a year ago. This is the story of Nick Sauer. This story broke in the summer of 2018 and involved a man of the name Nick Sauer, a Republican politician from Illinois in his mid-30s. Sauer's former girlfriend was a woman of the name Kate Kelly, who, according to Politico, filed a complaint alleging that Sauer had used an Instagram account to catfish other men using her privately shared naked photos. Nick would use this account to direct message men with her photos to engage in graphic conversations of a sexual nature. The men believed that they were communicating with Kelly, and Nick shared private details of her life. Sauer's poor treatment of Kelly didn't stop there though. Kelly claimed that the two began a long-distance relationship in 2016 after meeting on the dating app Tinder. She moved from Chicago to California in June 2017 to be closer to him, but the couple broke up in March 2018. Kelly claimed that the reason that they broke up was that she discovered that he had been dating other women. It would have been when the two were long distance that she sent him these provocative images, as this is something that a lot of long distance couples do. Sauer apparently tried to make it up to Kelly, sending her roses and, upon being asked, reimbursing her $2,000 for various expenses made during the relationship. It was around this time, roughly late June, that Kelly would discover the Catfish Instagram account. And though the mere existence of this account was an unpleasant shock to Kelly, another one was about to come. She would soon discover that this was not a new account. According to the Politico reports, in July, a person who had been conversing with this account reached out to Kelly and informed her that he had been talking to this catfish for 4 months. And if you do the maths, this date of 4 months ago would match up to when Sauer and Kelly broke up. And that would of course leave Kelly to question, was the person behind this account Nick Sauer? Was this some sort of revenge for their breakup? As we now know, yes it was. Within her complaint, Kelly wrote that Sauer admitted to it. "He came to my house and confessed to catfishing men with my photos for 2 years to at least 8 men. He was unable to provide names and begged that I let it go." Which would go to confirm that not only was Sauer allegedly cheating during their relationship, but he was also using her photos to catfish others throughout the entire time they were dating. Of course, Kelly didn't let it go, and Sauer was exposed to the world as a vicious catfish. And that's to say nothing of his career and how hypocritical his behaviour was. Nick began his professional career in the US Department of Commerce under President George W. Bush. By 2018, he was on the House Sexual Discrimination and Harassment Task Force. The same day that these allegations came to light, he resigned in shame. And on the 9th of January 2019, it was announced that Sauer was indicted on 12 counts of the offence of non-consensual dissemination of private sexual images involving 2 separate victims. In November 2023, Sauer entered into a plea agreement in which he pled guilty to 1 charge of attempted non-consensual dissemination of a private sexual image, a Class A misdemeanor, while the rest of the charges were dismissed. He was sentenced to 90 days in jail, 2 years probation, and 120 hours of public service. On to our next story, and I'll try to keep this one brief because this is one I've actually spoken about in the past. And arguably this doesn't exactly count as a catfish, at least not in the traditional sense, but it is such an insane story I just have to tell it once more. This is Great Britain's kinky NHS fraudster. This is Richard William Cove, a man who in 2021 was 45 years old, and during the summer of that year was exposed for making sexually charged calls to the NHS 111 line. Essentially, this is a number that you can ring if you're British and need urgent medical advice, but it's not life-threatening. And from there, you'll be directed to where you need to go and what you need to do. For any foreigners watching this video, the NHS is our National Health Service, so this is our healthcare establishment. And the NHS is quite notorious right now for being in a spot of bother. People who urgently need appointments currently have to wait a very long time to receive them, and the staff that work there are overworked and underpaid. People should not be using NHS resources to get their sexual kicks, but between April 2019 and April 2021, that is exactly what Richard William Cove did. The catfish part came in when he masked his identity to sound like an old woman. He apparently disguised his voice and pretended to be an old lady with some foot problems. He would also use the phone numbers and addresses of real people who were later contacted by the NHS without them asking for it. When he got put through, he would ask the handler about their feats and got off to it. This would cost the NHS £21,000 of taxpayer money. I played this game in the original video, but I'll play it again once more. How many times do you think that Richard William Cove called the NHS 111 line? He was active for 2 years and cost the taxpayer £21,000. How many times do you think he called up the number? Leave your comments below because I'm about to tell you now, he called it 1,263 times, the fucking prick. As punishment, he had to join a sex offenders treatment program, do 200 hours of unpaid work, and complete 30 rehabilitation days, as well as paying £2,000 compensation to the NHS. But that punishment would pale in comparison to the next catfish that we'll be discussing. Of all the offenders that we've mentioned so far in this video, this next one for a time saw by far the most amount of success. She was a Sydney woman named Sana Durbus, who between the late 2000s and mid 2010s was a serial catfish, and a vindictive and ruthless one at that. During her 6-year spree as an online conwoman, she targeted lonely, vulnerable older men, mostly pensioners, with a plethora of different tactics to deceive and profit off of them in one of the most successful and cruel catfishing incidents ever recorded. She used niche web dating services such as Lava Life, Meeting Point, and Click Introductions to find her victims. One of her most common tactics was to entice these men by messaging that she wanted to meet them at a hotel, with the hotel room costing $600. The men who fell victim to this ploy would send her the money to book the hotel room, and then she would simply block contact with them, taking their money in the process. Another tactic she would use was to seduce these men and then afterwards claim that she needed money urgently to pay for a close relative's funeral costs. She reportedly killed off her mother 6 separate times, despite her mother still being alive. She also decided to kill off her own children in these fake stories. She'd manipulate these gullible men out of their cash by saying that she had to pay for funeral costs or medical care for her kids. One time, she told a 69-year-old that she couldn't pay him back for the funeral costs because her son had actually died of swine flu, which is a real throwback to 2009. Of course, this was quite a big operation. Durbus used several different aliases as a means of evading getting caught, and according to Vice, police recovered no less than 15 mobile phones from her Western Sydney home, as well as personal diaries containing the names and contact details of hundreds of men. Of course, after doing this for such a long time, it was only ever going to end in one way. She flew too close to the sun, and in 2014, after more reports of financial catfishing, Durbus was exposed. Her career highlights included making $75,000 from one victim, $87,000 from another, $186,000 from a third victim, and if you thought that was crazy, you're not going to believe this. Vice writes that she was able to take more than $1.7 million from another. As I already mentioned, these men were usually a bit older, pensioners we're talking about, and according to Vice, she even once left a man with as little as $20 in his account. Also, let it be known that this 1.7 million payday was reportedly very early into her catfishing days. She could have just let sleeping dogs lie, cash out, and live a very comfortable life, but instead she kept scamming for years afterwards. Apparently, she had a cocaine habit that would cost her between $10,000 and $12,000 a week, so she was burning through cash quick. And you might be wondering, as a mother of 4, where was her husband in all of this? I have to assume that he knew that something was up. The scale of this operation, this sudden cash influx, surely at some point he would have been able to piece 2 and 2 together if he wasn't in on it from the beginning. And based upon his behaviour after all of this went down, it wouldn't exactly surprise me if he was. Clearly he had a problem with journalists and reporters trying to capture some footage for the story.
Fists were flying as the Durbus family left court today. Family and friends of Sana Durbus venting their fury after watching the 42-year-old sentenced to 3.5 years jail.
Durbus would plead guilty to 11 counts of obtaining money by deception. She was sentenced to a minimum of 18 months behind bars, with a maximum of 3.5 years. She was also ordered to pay back the money. So Durbus sold all of her assets, and as of February 2017, according to the Sydney Morning Herald, had thus far paid back $745,000. A good start, but still a far cry off the $2.2 million in total that she had reportedly stole. And please allow me to steal your attention for a second as I ask you to check out my recent video on banned subreddits next. It's a fantastic video. If you enjoyed this one, I'm sure you'll love it too. I once again want to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already yet. I wasn't joking about my hamster, by the way. Samantha won it in the settlement. She said she's gonna do bad things to him if this video doesn't get 3,000 likes. You have to do it, guys, for nibbles.